Okay, so let's get started with a DGM into a full block draft. I'm Ari. I'm going to be doing some draft videos here for average drafters. While I haven't won any big tournaments, I've been doing pretty well in limited recently. Made day two of the last few limited Grand Prix, top 8s and PTQs. So I'm trying to get everything together. Haven't quite made it to the big stage yet, but I'm working on that. So here we have a pretty interesting pick. Um, I do like Beetle Mage quite a bit. I think it's a pretty strong card. First, picking a gate in this format is reasonable. A lot of the time, the gates end up being pretty relevant, especially when you can splash removal. Like Ors of Gilgate's pretty good because you can splash white or black, which are both removal colors. However, that all being said, I think the pick here is going to be Lavinia of the 10th. She's just really good. Randomly, protection from red will just hose some decks. And then the decks that it doesn't entirely hose with the protection, the detain is quite strong against. So either way, you're getting a pretty good card there. So this is an interesting pack as well. We have a few different options. Tithe Drinker, one of the better commons in the whole format. Steeple Rock, good, but it is a 5-drop, and I don't like taking the 5s and 6s and 7s early in pack 1 because there's a lot of them in the 3-block format, and it's very possible that we can end up with some 5-drops once we get into Gatecrash. So I think here the pick is between Dimir Guildgate and Warp Physique and Tithe the Drinker. Those are probably our three best cards. Again, the Guildgate would be fine, but I think we have two better cards than it. To me, it really comes down to Warp Physique or Tithe Drinker, and I will actually take the Tithe Drinker here. I like that it's a good early drop. I like that it has Extort, which gives you reach in the late game. And honestly, my experiences of Warp Physique have not been that good. I found the card to be pretty slow. Oftentimes, by the time it's the point in the game where you want to be killing something, your hand has maybe two or three cards in it, so it ends up being kind of like a really awkward disfigure effect, and it rarely takes care of the larger creatures, which are more problematic. So here we have a pack that's significantly worse than the other two. We have a Maw of the Obsidat, which is a pretty strong card, one of the better 5+ drops. At first you look at it and you think its ability is not going to be that relevant, but it actually does come up quite a bit. It makes combat pretty annoying for your opponent, and if you can combine it with stuff like that makes tokens, or you just have to, you play like a mediocre creature on turn 8 or whatever, all of a sudden that guy turns into a threat because now you can crusade your whole team. It's pretty much that or Windrake. I'm not a big fan of Windrake in the full block format. There's just too many cards like Thrashing Moss Dog and various different, medium-sized blockers that make the card significantly worse than a Windrake effect, type card typically is in limited. There've just been a lot of, 3/3, 2/4, 2/3 kind of flyers and reach guys that make a 2/2 flyer not as appealing as it's been in the past. So here we have a few interesting ones. Deputy of Acquittal seems kind of interesting. It's really good with Lavinia of the 10th. You can just like put it back to your hand and detain all their stuff again. Opal Lake Gatekeepers is decent, but we don't have any gates right now. Boros Mastiff would be fine, but I don't like picking one up this early. And then there's also a Turn and Burn. I think here I'm going to hedge on this Turn and Burn. I know it's a little more of a speculative pick than the others. The safe pick would be Deputy of Acquittals, but I think we'll have some more chances at those. And a fourth pick, Turn and Burn, might be a signal. I mean, since this is Ravnica, playing 3 to 4 to even 5 colors is not impossible. And even if we can really only cast Turn consistently, that's still actually going to be pretty good. It's going to enable us to, maybe eliminate some annoying abilities a creature could have, deal with them in combat. There's all kinds of stuff that we can do with Turn and Burn, so I'm not too unhappy to have that. Here, our picks are basically Protect and Serve, which I don't like taking early. It doesn't really do enough. Maze Glider, but as I mentioned before, I don't like early 6 drops in this format because there's just so many of them. Obsidat's Aid, which I haven't really played with a lot, or a Clue Stone. I think I'm going to take the Obsidat's Aid. I know our curve's already a little high, but I'm not that familiar with this card. I've seen it played a little bit. I haven't had a ton of experience with it. So I'm just going to err on the side of taking a a rare that I'm not entirely familiar with, but I think has a good shot at being pretty strong. So here, I think I like the Deputy of Acquittals over the Azorius Guildgate and Boros Mastiff. As I mentioned before, I think this deck is actually pretty good for Deputy of Acquittals. It's a nice little combat trick just to sort of flash a guy in. Saves some of your guys from removal spells or arrest type effects. And we already have a Lavinia that just combos so well with it. I could certainly see going for the Azorius Guildgate here. It does seem like we're going to be both of those colors. But I think we're going to pick up some clue stones here on the wheel, and we have a lot of time to get fixing, whereas Deputy of Acquittals is one of the few 2-drops that I think a blue-white deck actually wants. Alright, in this pack we have very little. There's a Woodlock Crawler, which is actually insane. I always kind of underestimated this Woodlock guy, but recently I've been playing him more and more, and I've just been really impressed with how relevant Landwalk is. And the fact that he just blocks all the green creatures forever is quite good too. That being said, we already have a Deputy and the Test Drinker, so I don't think that getting Demure colors on turn 2 is very reasonable in this deck. It seems like that's going to be tough. I'd like to take the Demure Cluestone. It kind of makes up for, passing up on the mana fixing the previous pick. And we look like a deck with a lot of 5-drops, a lot of mana requirements in 3 different colors. I think playing a couple Cluestones is probably going to be fine in our deck. It's most probably what we actually need. So we got some interesting ones. You have either Notion Thief, which in limited is pretty much just a 3/1 flash. I don't think his ability is going to come into play very often, if at all. We have an Orzhov Cluestone, which I would probably play if we had it. A Rakdos Drake, which I will avoid. It's very similar to the Wind Drake, except it can't even block. I think the picker is going to be this Cluestone. I'm not real impressed with Notion Thief. I don't think its ability is really something we need. So we'll go ahead and avoid it for now. Here we have either a Mind Static, a marginally playable counterspell, Bayanelli Blackguard, which is pretty bad. In a team draft that we had in our hotel in Providence, one of my friends ripped one in half, just to prove to everyone that shouldn't be in their deck. And I agree. Other than the fact that it's a rogue and it can block the rogue guy, it's pretty useless. I'll take a Pilfered Plans. We may play it, we may not, but it'll be decent if we do. Alright, here come more and more Cluestones. I guess we could have had a Notion Thief and ended up with a Cluestone anyway. Most of all these cards are pretty bad. I guess I'll just take the on-color Cluestone and just sort of move on. Here, we're probably not playing any of these cards. Gleam of Battle is a card I thought was going to be decent in this format. It turns out it's just way too slow. I think we'll take Maze Behemoth. It's probably not getting played, but out of all these cards, it's the one that I maybe would play if green for some reason opens up. Speaking of green opening up, let's go ahead and take a Gruul Cluestone. Why not? Okay, cool. So we wheel yet another one of these. As I was mentioning before, I don't like playing a lot of Cluestones in my deck, but if we're a blue-based kind of, 3 to 4 color control deck, we're probably going to have to play a couple Cluestones, and the fact that we now have, our pick of any Cluestones that we could ever need is fine too. We are not riot controlling anyone. Whispering Madness. Not exactly where I want to be first pick. I think the real picks here are either Holy Mantle, which is a pretty decent win condition. It can actually steal quite a few games. Court Street Denizen, which is decent, but I don't think our deck is really that aggressive. Last Thoughts, which I love, and it's one of my favorite cards in the whole format, but it's realistically not a first pick. And Vizkopa Confessor, which I like, but our 5-drop slot is pretty stacked right now. That being said, I think here I would like to probably just take this Vizkopa Confessor. I know that seems like a weird pick to take it over Holy Mantle, but I don't know if double white's going to be realistic in our 3 or 4 color control deck. And the Confessor is actually a decent card. The fact that it can take away their bomb and then, have like some incidental value as a blocker and an extorter is pretty strong, and I don't really think this is a Holy Mantle deck. Wow, now we have our choices of so many things here. As an Enter the Infinite, the old Mythic, followed by the foil rare in Scar Goliath, both uncastable and close to unplayable. I've seen Scar Goliath steal a fair amount of games, just randomly steal a game, when somebody gets to 6 or 7 mana. But most of the time, it's a pretty much an uncastable thing that just gets stuck in your hand forever. We have a Daring Skyjack, which is a pretty good 2-drop. It looks like we're going to be base white, maybe splashing the black and or blue. At this point, we're not really that committed to blue. We could even end up cutting blue if it comes down to it. Or what I think is the pick here, which is Orzhov Charm. Orzhov Charm, in my opinion, is much better than something like the plus X minus X spell we saw earlier, because it actually can deal with absolutely anything. The other 2 modes don't come up nearly as often, but they do occasionally matter, and just having like a really flexible, good removal spell that can deal with any problem we come across is pretty good. Alright, here we have a pretty easy one. Looks like a Syndic of Tice and then a bunch of nonsense. The only other card in this entire pack I'd even want in any deck is Crown Ceratok, and this does not look like a Crown Ceratok situation to me. So we'll take the Syndic and be happy that we have a bunch of extorters. Okay, now I think this is the most interesting pick we've had in the whole draft. We have a Kingpin's Pet or an Orzhov Charm. We just took an Orzhov Charm, which is pretty good. It gives us a nice removal spell. And, having a second would be decent. Just having multiple sort of outs to opponent's creatures is pretty strong. However, Orzhov Charm having the Vendetta option has a pretty high downside. You end up losing, probably somewhere between 3 and 5 life most of the time, and having 2 of them is actually not that good. If they were Doomblades, I think I'd want 2, but they're not. They're Vendettas, so I think I will just take the Kingpin's Pet and just be happy that I even got a mid-pack Kingpin's Pet. Now we have another interesting one. I think this pick really just comes down to Mental Vapors versus Dimir Guildgate. I'm a pretty big fan of Mental Vapors. I think it's one of the most underrated cards in the entire format. It really, really does a lot to close out a game, especially when you put it on something like a Kingpin's Pet. Just the fact that you mind rot them and then just sort of like are able to attrition them out over the span of several turns just makes the card really good. I played it in my main deck in Grand Prix Houston, which was a sealed event, and the card was awesome. I mean, it was unbelievable. Unfortunately, the rest of my pool was somewhat mediocre, and it didn't end up doing that well. But here, all that being said about Mental Vapors, I'm going to take Dimir Guildgate because I'm pretty sure Mental Vapors will wheel. While I believe it's one of the best cards in the whole format, I think it's pretty underappreciated by most people, and I think that it's very likely that we're going to be able to pick up that Mental Vapors in the wheel. Here we have Basilica Screecher versus Executioner Swing. As earlier we passed up a removal spell for a Kingpin's Pet, but now I think I'm actually going to do the opposite and take the Executioners. We already have a fair amount of early drops for this style of an Esper type control deck with Tithe Drinker, Syndic of Tice, Deputy, Kingpin's Pet. That's pretty strong already on the early turns. And Executioner Swing, I'd rather have a mix of 1 swing and 1 charm than 2 of either, so I think that actually works out just fine. Here it's really just Sage's Rodenizin or Nav Squad Commandos. I would probably just slam the Commandos most of the time, but our 5-drop spot is looking pretty full. I might probably hide this Maze Behemoth. It seems unlikely to get played. Our 5-drop spot, I mean, even if we don't play Obzedat's Aid, which seems likely given the permanents we currently control on our here in our picks, Nav Squad Commandos does just not seem likely to make our deck, whereas Sage's Rodenizin might make it. If we have, for example, like a really good pack 3 with a lot of good Azorius cards, we could very well end up playing a Sage's Road Denizen. Here we have I can't even say it. Gridlock or nothing. I'm not going to hate draft an Ivy Lane Denizen because we're not going to take it to that level. Gridlock almost certainly won't get played, but I mean, I'm not going to hate draft an Ivy Lane. That's not my methodology for winning this draft. We're not gonna start hate drafting Ivy Lane Denizens. Here I'm gonna take Last Thoughts over Court Street. Here I actually will just take the Ivy Lane Denizen. Sure. Ah, we could not get our Mental Vapors back. That is unfortunate. Oh, spoke too soon. I was afraid we weren't getting Mental Vapors back, but it turned out that our pick of the Guildgate over the Vapors worked out quite well, as we ended up with it anyway. It's strange how that card gets so little respect when I'm easily slamming it into my main deck immediately. It's certainly in our deck, and I'll be very happy to have it. I wouldn't necessarily even mind playing both Mental Vapors and Last Thoughts if necessary. Okay, so here comes pack 3, and we opened a mythic that we can't use. Jared, which is one of the better bombs in the whole format. It's just, a giant creature that also happens to have an excellent ability that can allow you to win the game without attacking. When you evaluate these kind of bomb, mythics and rares, one of the best qualities is when they can win a game without having to enter combat, which Jared can do, and also Pontiff of Blight is very good at doing. It's always better when you don't even need to attack to win. You can just sort of sacrifice guys or use abilities. So that's one of the reasons that Jared is so good. Is it never can really get smited or anything because you just simply don't need to attack with it. That being said, this is pretty lame for us. The best, card is probably Vassal Soul, which I'm not very pumped about. As I mentioned before, I do not like the Windrakes in this format, the three triple block format, and so I'm not a big Vassal Soul fan. I'm actually going to take Rakdos Guildgate. We do have a turn and burn that we may want to cast at some point, and I don't think we're actually missing out on much there. So this is an interesting pick. We have, Dreg Mangler is obviously the best card in this pack by quite a wide margin, and Dreg Mangler is actually really one of the best, I think one of the best cards in the whole format. Just the fact that it can attack and block so effectively at such a cheap cost and has, such a huge upside with Scavenge makes it one of the best, early drops. In triple Return to Ravnica, it was decent. I think it was a little worse because there were a lot of guys as we can see in this pack, an Ogre Jailbreaker type card. There were a lot of Jailbreakers and Lobber Crews and all these guys who sort of would get in the way. With the 3-block format, Dragmangler also can now has friends like Slaughterhorn that allow it to get through those types of things, and also there's just simply fewer X4, 4 toughness guys. All that being said, we're slamming Volatile Rig. It's a pretty good rare. It's a little, difficult to figure out exactly what it's going to do. Occasionally, it's going to, just be a Wrath type effect, and sometimes it's just going to hit them for 4 a turn. So Volatile Rig can be a bit awkward, but I think it was still the best card in that pack. Here, the best card in this pack is Vitu-Ghazi Guildmage. When it's not even remotely close, everything else is much, much, much worse. So this is one of the dilemmas that you get into sometimes in the full block draft, is that you have, Vitu-Ghazi Guildmage here, and it's pretty late. We're getting it, We're getting it 3rd, which means that the people in front of us are almost certainly not Selesnya. And the only other options in our pack are Void Wielder, which is strong or really high on the 5-drops right now, Rakdos Guildgate, which we just picked one up, and a Skyline Predator, which I'm not a huge fan of. So, believe it or not, guys, I'm actually going to take this Vitu-Ghazi Guildmage. While it's not necessarily true that we're going to play it, if we do play it, our deck is going to be unreal. And since we're seeing it so late, there's a pretty high chance that we're going to see a couple more green cards. We do have this Gruul Cluestone we picked up earlier, and if we can just pick up 1 or 2 more pieces of fixing, Vitu-Ghazi Guildmage may very well make it into our deck. Like I said, all we missed out on was the Skyline Predator, and I'm not super, super excited about that anyway. Here it's really just a Void Wielder or an Action Injunction. Um, a Vassal Soul again is fine, but I feel like we're going to get a card like that, whether it's a Sunspire Griffin or a Tower Drake or a Vassal Soul. I feel like we're going to get one of those at some point in the course of the next couple picks, and or even this we could maybe this Fairy Imposter will come back. Who knows? Any of these guys are going to do roughly the same thing, so I'm not super concerned. Void Wielder's good in a controlling deck, so I'm just going to snap it up. All these Rites of Reapings, man. I think here just an Action Injunction. Not a lot to say, really. Alright, well, our venture into Vitu-Ghazi Guildmage land does not appear to be paying off very well. I thought we might have been able to get away with a small green splash, but it looks like perhaps it was just there was a really good rare and maybe a foil rare or a really strong uncommon picked ahead of Vitu-Ghazi, which is how we got it third, because the rest of the stuff, it does not look like it's happening. That being said, I'll just take an Izzet Charm. We may or may not play it, but we do already have a Turn and Burn here, so I mean, it's plausible that it might get played. Everything else here is pretty mediocre, so it's not going to happen. Ooh, Dispel. Alright, I like Dispel. I think you can main deck Dispel in this format. It's got a lot of just uses, everything from just countering a pump spell, countering something like a Tristani's Judgment. Um, an Explosive Impact is another, extremely relevant instant that you can counter. So I find that card to be pretty strong. All right, so we're still seeing some pretty decent cards this late. I mean, Common Bond's pretty good. Seek the Horizon is actually fairly playable, not for us, but in general. Azorius Arrestor is a card that I like. Um, Fall of the Gavel is a pretty good counter spell, although our 5-drop slot is pretty filled up. I think I'll just take Azorius Arrestor here. We may have a Last Thoughts and a Mental Vapors in our deck, and we need to put those on something. Sure, downsize. All right. Well, this is excellent in my opinion. I think this is great to have an Azorius Keyrune. One of the nice things about the Keyrunes, especially the ones that have pseudo evasion, like this one has flying, or the Rakdos Keyrune has first strike, which makes it difficult to block, or the unblockable Keyrune, that's the Dimir Keyrune. Any of these Keyrunes that are slightly difficult to block are just excellent with Cipher cards, because you can Cipher onto the Keyrunes, and that is an excellent play that comes up quite often. We'll take Courses Accord, not going to play it. Alright, an action, sure. Sure. Okay, so, our gamble on Vitu-Ghazi Guildmage did not pay off, which is unfortunate, and we did not get back any Vassal Souls, which is not great, but, I wasn't that excited about Vassal Souls anyway. I'm not, so broken up about not getting a Vassal Soul in my deck. I think I likely would not have really cared about it anyway. So we're going to lay it out, and I'll be back with, a couple of different ways we can configure this deck. So here we have what I think is going to be our deck. Um, yeah, I think it would have been nice if we had gotten a Vassal Soul back, or, obviously taking the Vitu-Ghazi Guildmage over the 3/4 flyer was a very ambitious pick. I know it could look really bad at this point, but I think getting the third pick Vitu-Ghazi was actually, a decent signal that we could see a couple more green cards. And if we had seen a few more green cards, we'd probably be playing a Gruul, Cluestone plus like a couple other strong green cards. Like this Courses of Chord would be in our deck, and maybe one other green thing if we'd see it. So it's not like a ridiculous pick, because I think Vitu-Ghazi Guildmage is probably 10 or 20 times better than that 3/4 flash. Of course, as it turns out, It didn't quite work out for us, but it happens at times. Um, as an aside, I actually do like our deck. It's not the best deck I've ever drafted, but I think, our picks were fine. I think the Kingpin's Pet over the second Orzhov Charm worked out quite well. I think the Executioner's Swing over the 1/2 worked out quite well, because we really need these two removal spells in our deck, and I don't think that having a 1/2 instead of the Swing would really be that great here. We have actually a fair amount of sort of tempo plays with Inaction Injunction and Azorius Arrestor. We have decent top end, not great with Lavinia of the 10th. Um, I'm going to play this Obsidat's Aid, mostly because I've just never really played it before and I just want to see how it is. It's possible that it's really bad, but I don't think that it's, the worst. I mean, it can get back a Volatile Rig, which seems to be one of the better cards in our deck. It can get back Lavinia if she happens to die somehow. And it allows us to actually, target ourselves with Pilfered Plans for some value later in the game. So we're going to run with this. We'll see how it does, and I'll be right back with round one.